picked a good week to start daily vlogging, eh? Lockdown. Anyway, guys, enough about that. Welcome back to another Talk Tuesdays. And I thought I would do another little image critique. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar with that, this is image critiques of my own work. And generally, it's more to do with the stuff that I don't particularly like than the stuff that I do like. I find it, and I guess a lot of this came out of the first lockdown when we definitely did have a lot more time indoors. I spent a long time sort of just going back through some of my own images and just really questioning what I liked and especially what I didn't like, what I could have got done differently. And so that's what we'll do today. So we'll jump over to the screen and get started. Okay, so what I thought we'd do is actually just focus on, again, one particular scene rather than a whole range of images. And I guess anyone from the North Coast probably doesn't need an introduction to this particular location. It's the Herring Pond in Portstewart. Really fabulous place for, especially when there's some stormy conditions. And what I thought I'd do is just go through these 8 images and just talk about some of the things that I like, but more importantly, some of the things I don't like and I don't think work, that help me maybe just get towards an image that perhaps was something closer to what I had envisaged. So let's start off with image 1. And actually, just one thing very quickly before we get deep down into the individual images. We're not really looking here at the post-processing side of things. I'll probably talk a little bit about post-processing, but what I've actually done for these 8 images is a quick and dirty edit. And that mostly was me just clicking the auto button on Lightroom, just to give me something that I could actually talk about. So this is less about the processing and more about the composition, the look and the feel of the image themselves. So let's take a look at the first image. So this is the first scene that I want to kind of talk about. And the first thing that I'm going to say is, I remember at the time, and obviously you're going to see that here, that the composition itself was quite rushed. So this is the original image that I had taken in the field. We had a little bit of burst of light and I was kind of panicking a little bit, just trying to sort of get something set up. And you can see here that this is a very sort of wide, loose, messy composition. Now, you could argue that you could maybe crop it in just a little bit, still keeping it sort of closer to a sort of 3:2 aspect ratio. And maybe there's a little bit of a sort of a leading line here, but I still just think that it's probably a lot to do with the nature of the waves being very, very bright. I could obviously try to darken those down in post, but I just felt that that whole sort of wider scene was maybe just a little bit too wide, and so that's why I brought it in almost a square crop. Now, the other thing that has always bothered me about this particular location is the overlap of the steps with the dark rocks. And again, on a particular day where you have sort of pretty wild waves coming in, that can be overcome if you wait for a wave just to sort of wash over the rocks themselves, and you get sort of some nice sort of bright contrast between the stones or the iron steps and those white rocks. But you can see here that part of the steps actually disappear into the background, and I personally don't particularly like that. The other thing that I would say from my eye that is distracting is actually this man-made walkway. Not a lot you can do about that unless I think I've talked about this in a different video, I'm not sure whether you've seen that or not, but you obviously can duck down and raise yourself up a little bit to sort of minimize that. But again, just like the separation between the iron steps and the rocks, the other thing that you could look to do here would be to wait for one of those waves to kind of come across and sort of drift across or wash across that walkway, especially if you had some nice early morning reflective light. That would actually make this whole walkway a lot more appealing. I've included this kind of little stopper down here, as I like to call it, just to stop the eye from wandering off the frame too much. Obviously, if I was going to process this to a final image, I would probably look to darken this area down just a little bit, just to stop the eye wandering too much. And then finally from this image, the other bit that I find quite off-putting is just it's quite messy in here. And again, just like the stone steps and just like the walkway, a wave could be my friend here, because of course a wave washing over that rocks would simplify the scene and hopefully make it a lot tidier and a lot more pleasing to the eye. But so this was the first scene, and a number of things that I personally find don't quite work with it. Okay, so another slight derivative of that first image, and again, just a very messy composition. All the issues that we had before, the overlaps, that very bright sort of man-made stone structure. Perhaps a little bit more pleasing shapes in the waves now, and especially where you have, so you see how a wave washing over some of those rocks actually does not only simplify the image, but actually perhaps makes it a little bit more pleasing. I do quite like the sort of length of the wave in the water here, the fact that it stretches across the full frame. But what I like most about this image, I remember seeing it in the field, and while it's a very small element in the overall frame, I just love these three little wispy clouds here. I think it just adds a little sort of notation almost in that otherwise sort of pinky purpley sky. Now, speaking about the sky, I was always struggling with this area throughout the morning. I would have preferred it to be, completely covered in sort of those pink purpley clouds, but we had this little gap here. But yeah, they're just those three little elements I really liked in the field, and I really like in the final image. But the overall image itself, not that great. Okay, so on to the next image, and starting to get perhaps something that is a bit more appealing, not least because of that lovely soft early morning light. Now, there's definitely a couple of things that I quite like about this particular image. I quite like the curve in the foreground here. I think that is quite a nice visual element, as is quite often the case with curves. Lovely little bit of movement here in the wave as well. Obviously, the overall light is quite appealing, and of course, what we've managed to do is bringing ourselves a little bit of way along. We've managed to remove most of that man-made walkway, and I guess with that more appealing light, those steps perhaps take on a little bit more of a nicer look. In the background, you can see some of those rocks that I had spoken about before in regards to their messiness, and you can see that they do start to get a little bit more pleasant, more pleasing with some of the waves moving over. Still, though, we have this huge white patch on the right hand side, empty space. Now, it's helped perhaps a little bit, and I remember in the field my head starting to kind of notice these rocks coming and going as the waves were washing over them, and thinking to myself how I could possibly use those in a composition. So perhaps they do help to kind of break up that emptiness. And of course, we still have the problem with the steps blending into the background. You can see that where the sun is catching those iron steps, they're lovely and crisp, and sort of they stand out, but then they kind of disappear off into the background. And again, probably 90% of people wouldn't really worry about that, but it has always been something that kind of bothers me. But it's not a bad image. It kind of works in some ways. A similar feel to that previous image, but now we're in a portrait orientation, and I think the portrait orientation works quite well. We still have a little hint of a curve going on here, and there's the added element of not only some lovely soft side lights on the flats of those rocks, but also we have some lovely waves moving over those rocks. Like I spoke about on a couple of occasions, now we have a slight little bit of wave in behind those rocks, and you can see that all of a sudden it does help the iron steps to stand out just a little bit more. Still a nice little bit of sort of curvature on the wave, with a lovely little bit of pink reflective light up here. I still think that there's a bit too much white empty space here for my liking, and I think that needs something else to kind of break it up. You could argue that you could potentially darken this down to sort of stop the eye from sort of being drawn to it, but it's such a big space. I just think we need to break that up. But again, quite a pleasing image, with just a couple of elements perhaps wrong with it. Okay, so now we've actually removed the sky completely. Now don't get me wrong, the sky was beautiful, but in this instance I decided to look at actually removing the sky and focusing on that in a couple of frames. Now, as I spoke about, the white empty space was problematic, but I think it's helped again here by just having this little crop of rocks. It almost keeps the eye kind of bouncing maybe between these two elements. Now again, going back on the processing side of things, I would certainly look to darken down this particular wave. If that was the case, I would probably darken down some of these edges as well, just so you trying to sort of get the eye to maybe go in this circular direction. You can start to see now as well. Now, unfortunately, on this particular day, even though the waves were quite rough out at sea, by the time they kind of came over the stone steps, or the iron steps, they were quite light. So we didn't get a huge amount of waves washing over, but you can perhaps start to see what is possible as those waves wash across to actually make this man-made stone structure a little bit more appealing. But I think removing the sky has helped here. Now if I go on to the next image, it's just another derivative of that particular frame, and again really starting to make use of this particular curve through. I just think having this clump of rocks up here really does help in this particular composition to kind of help things stay within the frame. If I just bring that in just a little bit, there's a little distraction up in the top left hand corner. I love this little wave in the top right hand, the top left hand side. I just think, again, a little bit like the clouds before, and it's just a little notation. And what I like about an image, whether it be one of my own or someone else's that I'm looking at, is little scenes or little elements within the frame present themselves the longer you look at them. And I think this would be one little touch that maybe your eye wouldn't be drawn to whenever you first started looking at the frame. But perhaps it would just every so often catch it and add a nice little element. But this is actually starting to get quite close to a frame. The light is obviously very beautiful. I would probably, if I was doing a little bit of post on this here, I would probably warm it up just a touch, just a little touch, because I don't remember it being as cool as that on the day. So I would probably even do a little bit of a split toning in here, just to warm those shadows up just a notch. But I think what I really started to appreciate was the importance of these three elements working together. The rocks at the bottom, a little sort of clump of rocks out here, and then bouncing back into the iron steps. And so on to what is close to the final image. In fact, this is a crop of a final image that I have worked a little bit on in post. Now, the crop I've put in here has removed the sky just to kind of keep that continuity from the previous couple of images. But all of the little elements that I sort of was working on in the field, I think are starting to come together here, where we're using, I think, to our advantage, this bottom framing element. We obviously do have a little bit of a visibility of those rocks that are potentially keeping our eye inside the frame, and then we're bouncing back across to some lovely light on the iron steps. We have a wave that's stretching across pretty much the whole of the frame, and of course some beautiful light. And then this is what I would class as probably the final image of the day. The same image as before, but this time we've just included the sky. And again, one of the things is quite appealing to me in this image is knowing what I went through to get to it. Now, not all of it was conscious, but some of it was. Certainly the little stones out here, I definitely wanted to make sure that they weren't completely covered over by the sea, because I think they were an important part of the image. I quite like how the white of the wave kind of stops here. You don't get a huge amount of white all the way through here, so it allows the eye perhaps, and again, I've spoken about this before. How I visualize an image could be completely different to how you're visualizing this image, so bear with me. But perhaps starting bottom left hand corner, the light and the textures kind of dragging us up through. We're then hitting this rock, and we're being drawn back into this. So we're keeping our eye in this area. However, we also do have some lovely light. Now, one could argue that the really bright patch on the right hand side is pulling your eye right the way up to the frame. Perhaps your eye is allowed to bounce between these two elements. I'm not sure. But I kind of wanted to keep the bright part. Obviously, the sun is just creeping into the side of the frame here. I kind of wanted to keep that in there, just as a little nod to that beautiful light that we were getting. Not without its flaws still, not least the fact that I think perhaps these steps are now at a little bit of an awkward angle. They look almost a little bit twisted, just how I'm pointing my camera down. And of course we still have no separation between the iron steps and the rocks. But overall, quite pleased with how this image has finished up. So there you go, guys. I hope you've enjoyed that little run through of a particular scene down at the herring pond and my own process again of getting to a final image. Probably now going to go back, as I quite often do, and do a couple of different edits on these images. Even that final one, I think, could probably be just toned back just a little bit now that I've come to look at it again. But I always like looking back through my older images from a particular shoot and seeing how I perhaps developed a frame, and of course using the opportunity here in lockdown to sort of go back through our images and just see what works, what doesn't work purely from a composition view. So right, well, as I said, what a great time to start daily vlogs, eh? At time of speaking right now, there's been no official word here in Northern Ireland, but I'm pretty sure that even by the time this video gets posted, we'll be under pretty significant sort of lockdown in law. That sounds like a TV series or something, a crime drama. So I'll talk a little bit about daily vlogs maybe in the next couple of days or so. But right, guys, well, once again, thanks a lot for watching, and until next time, take care. Bye bye.